Why exercise is bad for you. It all started when I got fat. I had been wanting to lose weight for a while, but being a not exactly starving artist, I didn't have the money to join a gym or buy equipment of my own. Yeah, I could have gone running, but who wants to do that? Not me. Never could run as a kid, so I was pretty sure I wouldn't be able to as an adult. That was when I decided to check out Craigslist to see if there was any free equipment that wasn't too ancient. I didn't want to end up with one of those shake the fat away machines. You know, the one with the belt? Yeah. No thanks. Anyway, I was lucky enough to find an elliptical that someone was giving away for free. What luck! Right. From what I saw in the pictures, it looked to be a few years old. One of the speakers on it was busted, but I didn't have an MP3 player to hook into it anyway. I decided to give the seller a call. After talking on the phone to a woman named Jeanette, a time was set for me to go to her home and pick up the elliptical. She sounded strangely relieved to be getting rid of the equipment, but I was too excited to be getting it for free that it really didn't faze me at the time. So that Friday, I borrowed my dad's truck and some rope and headed out to get my new treasure. On the way, I thought of how in a few short weeks I would be on my way to a swimsuit season bod. I already had my mind set that I would buy a cute bikini. After driving for around a half hour, flipping a couple US and stopping at stop signs long enough to be honked at, I made it to Jeanette's. Surprisingly, she was waiting outside. I thought it was a little odd, but again, I didn't pay much attention. Jeanette looked to be in her mid-50s and about 5 feet 6 inches. Her skin was a bit pale, and she had dark circles under her eyes. Her hair was a little unkempt, and it sort of looked as if she had just then thrown on whatever clothes she could find. Hi, Jeanette? I held out my hand to shake hers. Yes, hello? She said quietly. Her handshake was soft and reserved, and she had a bit of a worried look in her eye. Please come in. I followed her into the house and then into the living room. There it stood in all its free glory. Nice, I said, eyeing up the elliptical. Okay then. Would you like me to help you out with it? She asked quickly and nervously. Oh, yes, sure, thanks. I was a little surprised that she hadn't offered any kind of reason why she would be getting rid of the machine for free, so I asked. Oh, she said nervously. It just takes up too much space, and I don't really need the money. I can't see getting much for it anyway. She kind of half smiled and began to try and lift the back end of the machine. I rushed over to assist. After a few minutes and a lot of heave-hoing, we eventually got the elliptical into the bed of the truck. I thanked her once again and headed home. The machine sat in the bed of the truck until my boyfriend made it over to my apartment. It took a few tries and some remembering of high school geometry, but we successfully got it through the door and into the living room. I looked it over and, like I saw in the pictures online, the only thing wrong with it was the one broken speaker. Other than that, it was absolutely perfect. Here I come, beach body. I jumped on and started pressing buttons. Oh, okay. This one tracks your heartbeat. This one shows how many calories you burn. My boyfriend laughed at me and told me I looked like a kid at Christmas. After a little while, he left for work and I was left to play with my new toy. I had apparently worked out a little too hard because by 9 p.m. I was pooped and collapsed on my bed. The next thing I remember was waking up to a strange noise. In a daze, my brain tried its damnedest to figure out what the sound was. Was the faucet on? Was it raining outside? I opened one eye and looked at my window. I could see the moon. No clouds. The more I came out of my slumber, the clearer the whooshing sound got, and I realized what it was. The elliptical. Ugh. John, what the hell? I am trying to sleep, I said, assuming my boyfriend had come back over and decided to fool around on the machine. The whirring didn't stop. John! I yelled. It still didn't stop. I decided, groggily, to get up and throw something at him. Joe. I stopped mid-name as I turned the corner into the living room. No one was there. The machine wasn't moving at all and the whirring had stopped. John? I said quietly and confused. No one answered. I decided it must have been some kind of goofy dream. I went to my front door to make sure the lock was still on. It was, and then went back into my room. The rest of the night was quiet. The next morning I woke up with the sun on my face. I instantly remembered the night before but decided to shrug it off. I stood up and moaned. I was so sore, but I needed to keep a tight exercise schedule if I wanted buns of steel by May. I changed out of my pajamas and into my workout clothes, blasted some music and hopped on the machine. As I went to press the button to turn on the machine, I noticed that there were steps logged in the system. I knew I had cleared it out the night before and shut it down. I figured it was probably a glitch, one of the reasons it was free. But in the back of my mind I still held on to what had happened the night before. After my workout I once again cleared the screen and turned off the machine. I went into the bathroom and was about to step into the shower when I, again, heard the familiar whooshing sound. In a towel, I ran into the living room and came around the corner just in time to see the machine moving. I froze. What the hell did I just see? I thought to myself. I gathered my courage and walked toward the machine. It was still. I looked at the screen and it was lit up with a log of 10 steps. I couldn't believe what I was witnessing. Was there some kind of speed setting or something? I checked the screen, still in my towel, and tried to find anything that would be an auto setting. As I figured, there was no setting other than resistance. No speed. It was all manually powered. I turned the machine off, and a bit shaken, went back into the bathroom and took my shower. Later that evening, my boyfriend, John, came over after work. We had a nice meal and decided to sit down in the living room and watch a movie. I believe it was called The Shrine. As I recall, it was a pretty freaky movie, but that could be because I was on edge all evening from my mishap with the machine earlier that day. As we sat, cuddled up on the couch, I started to smell something. I kept sniffing to the point my boyfriend asked if I needed a tissue. I said no, of course, and told him I smelled something. He sniffed too and made a face. Geez. I know you have been working out and that is great, but you really need to take showers afterward. John laughed. It isn't me. I paused the movie. Well, it isn't me either, John said. I sniffed around the couch. It didn't seem to be coming from that area, so I got up and, as Toucan Sam would say, I followed my nose. The stench brought me to the elliptical. What the hell? I said softly. What is it? John said from across the room. It is coming from the elliptical, I said. Just as fast as the smell came on, it was gone. I sniffed and couldn't find a trace. The incident from earlier and this phantom smell got me to thinking of Jeanette. She seemed so shifty. Maybe there was another reason she wanted to get this cursed gym equipment out of her house. The next day I decided to pay an unexpected visit to Jeanette. She answered the door with a smile. She looked well rested and much less frazzled than before. As soon as she saw me, however, the happy, rested look turned into a look of worry. Oh, hi. Can I help you? Hello again, I said, smiling politely. I was just wondering if you had a moment. I just have a couple of questions about the machine that I picked up the other day. May I come in? She hesitated, then reluctantly welcomed me in. Is the machine not working? If not, just take it to the junkyard. I don't want it back, she said quickly. Oh no. I said, still trying to be as polite as possible. It isn't that at all. The worried look on her face turned to dread and a knot began to form in my stomach. Something wasn't right. Would you mind if we sit for just a moment? I really don't mean to intrude. Jeanette seemed to partially snap out of her funk and said, Of course. Let's sit in the dining room. I'll put on a pot of tea. She showed me into the dining room and told me to have a seat while she put the tea on. I sat for a few moments, and then my attention was grabbed by a photo on the wall. It was Jeanette and a man about the same age. I assumed it was her husband. A few minutes later, Jeanette shuffled into the dining room with 2 cups of hot tea. Good to have on a cold day like this, she said, trying to hide her nervousness. I smiled and took a sip. Is that your husband? It almost seemed like she jumped at the question. I'm sorry? I pointed to the photo on the wall. Oh yes. Sadly, he passed away a few months ago. She began to look even more nervous. Oh, I am so sorry to hear that, I said, trying my best to look sympathetic. How did he pass, if you don't mind me asking? She closed her eyes. I thought she was going to start crying. I was about to say never mind when she let out a sigh. Well, she said, he had gained some weight, and the doctor said it would be a good idea to start getting some exercise into his schedule. You see, his weight was affecting his blood pressure. She sighed again and paused for a moment. He actually had a heart attack and died while on that elliptical. I dropped my tea. Mommy dearest. As Julie began to regain consciousness, she knew something wasn't right. She started to panic as she realized she was strapped to a table. A big bright light beamed down onto her face, blinding her, as silhouettes moved silently around her. The silhouettes began to whisper, "She's perfect, Daddy, thank you." Julie tried to scream, but the gag in her mouth muffled her cries. Julie heard a little girl giggle as something began to brush her hair. She then heard another giggle in the corner in front of her. Only 2 hours before, Julie was responding to an ad on Craigslist, looking for a live-in nanny. And the last thing she remembered was ringing the doorbell. As the whispers continued, the lights switched off, leaving Julie with blind spots that covered the face of what appeared to be a man peering down at her. As the blind spots began to disappear and her eyes readjusted, she was greeted by a frail old man with a toothless grin. And behind him sat 2 dolls. They were life-sized dolls, and beautifully dressed. "I want to introduce you to my little girls. On the right is Masha and on the left is Dasha," said the man, rasped. "Say hello to your new mommy, girls." "Hi, Julie," giggled the 2 dolls. She couldn't help but notice that even though the sound appeared to come from the dolls, they didn't move. "My girls need a mommy," said the old man as he moved over behind the dolls, rubbing their hair as he stared at Julie. The old man moved clumsily over to the table Julie was strapped to, and removed the gag from her mouth. "Please don't scream, it will scare the girls," he said. Julie knew if there was a chance someone could hear her, she had to take it. Julie began screaming at the top of her lungs. "Make her stop, Daddy," sounded a voice coming from the doll's vicinity. As Julie screamed for her life, the old man began raining blows down upon her head. For a frail, old man, he is really strong, she thought, as the blows kept on coming. He only stopped once Julie began to lose consciousness. As she faded in and out, her captor left the room, leaving her alone with the 2 dolls sitting across from her. As Julie laid there, she imagined how she might escape the clutches of the crazy old man and his creepy dolls. As she frantically tried to free herself from the straps, she suddenly heard a noise behind her. Julie's eyes darted to the chair where the dolls were sitting. They were gone. Then, she heard a patter of tiny footsteps just behind her. "You're a bad mommy," giggled a voice from behind. Julie was stunned by fear. For a moment, she felt the porcelain hand of one of the dolls stroking her face. The feeling was soon replaced by that of a cold, hard, steel blade slipping in just beneath her chin. "Night, night, mommy. Sleep tight." Buyer's remorse. When I saw the car for sale on Craigslist, I was shocked. Not only was it a good price, decent shape, and reliable brand, but it was custom built for someone who didn't have legs. Both of my legs had to be amputated due to a childhood illness. Obviously, it made driving a lot more complicated. I learned to drive on a specially equipped car that had the gas and brake powered through a hand crank instead of pedals. I drove that thing for a decade before it was stolen. I still think about those bastards who took it. I immediately called the owner. He said he had the car altered for his daughter, who became a paraplegic after a car accident the year before. Even though he had it altered, his daughter refused to use the car and had given up driving altogether. He said the car itself was bringing her a lot of sadness, so he wanted to get rid of it as soon as possible. We arranged to meet that afternoon. I could not contain my excitement. I took out my favorite prosthetics, the ones my girlfriend Dana had painted koi fish on and fastened them in. Usually cars that were built for someone like me cost way too much to even fathom buying. Being disabled in this society is expensive. But this guy was selling the car for $1K. $1K! I would have given him 3 times as much and laughed it off. 2 o'clock finally arrived and I bussed over to the seller's place. It was in a nice neighborhood just 20 minutes or so from downtown. I got a few stares from my fellow passengers, but I was used to that. It's not every day you see a guy with fish on his legs. I got off a little early and walked to the house. Which house it was because the car was sitting right out front. It was beautiful. I walked up so quickly I almost didn't see the woman sitting on a picnic table in the yard. She was older than me, maybe in her early 40s, with white hair. She wore a thick black coat. I waved to her, but she didn't take her eyes off the car. "Hey, I'm Finn. I'm here about the car." Slowly she shifted her gaze over to me. The look on her face was one of fear. "There is something living in the back seat," she said softly. "Sorry, what?" I was sure I had heard wrong. "There is something alive in the back seat." She opened her mouth as if she were to say more, but then shut it and turned back to the car. A man rushed out of the house. "You must be Finn. I'm so sorry I didn't see you walk up." "It's no problem." I rubbed my arm awkwardly. "Hey, so she said there was something living in the back seat? Is there like a rodent problem or something?" The man turned around and saw the woman. "Oh shit, Jane is out here. I'm really sorry. She isn't right in the head." He ran over to her. "I told you to stay inside. He deserves to know what's living back there." She shrieked at him. He grabbed her and hoisted her up in his arms. Over his shoulder he called, "I'll be right back. Jane needs some rest." As she was carried into the house she screamed, "Beware! It took my legs, but it wants a life." When they both disappeared behind the door, I strongly considered bolting out of there, which would have been hard to do, since I didn't have my running prosthetics on. Jane must be the daughter he mentioned in his ad, considering the fact that she didn't walk. For some reason I had pictured her younger. This situation was really weird. It didn't sit right with me. But on the other hand, the car was such a good price. The man came back outside with a bit of sweat on his brow. "Sorry about that. I thought she was inside." "Jane is, well, she just has a few extra screws loose at the moment. Is she okay?" Looking back, that was a stupid question, but it was the only thing I could think of. The accident really got to her. Even though it's been a while, she can't let go of it. He sighed. "As you heard, she's even invented some sort of thing living in the back seat. She's convinced this is what caused her accident, not the fact she was drinking too much." "I'm so sorry," I said quietly. He shrugged. "But enough about the past. The car is in really good shape. After the accident I had the entire thing rewired." "Sorry, but are you saying this was the car that she was driving when she crashed?" He shuffled, looking away from me. "Yeah, I guess I should have mentioned it in the ad. But like I said, there's nothing wrong with the car. No damage from the accident at all. I added the special hand cranks for her. It drives perfectly. Normally I would be asking a lot more, but I just need it gone. I think for Jane to heal it needs to be with someone else." I took a test drive and he wasn't lying. The car was perfect. If not for the mileage, you might have thought it was brand new. Driving again was amazing. For the past year I had to rely completely on the bus or Dana to get me anywhere. This would change my life. Despite the strangeness of Jane and her odd comments, I bought the car. The man was so happy he nearly teared up. "You won't regret this," he said joyfully. I drove to the DMV, got the plates, and felt a freedom I missed dearly. I was on 4 wheels again. I headed straight to Dana's. She was going to be so excited for me. With this new car, maybe I could try and find a better job, and finally get the money for an engagement ring. The thought of proposing made me even happier. Dana was perfect for me in every way. She was strong when I was scared. She was calm when I would freak out. We balanced each other. I was head over heels for her. I knew that everything was going to work out. That's when I heard the rumble. It was quiet at first, like a typical car sound. But as I kept driving, it started to change. It began to sound more like a peculiar whisper. With every bump, the whispering was louder. My first reaction was annoyance. I thought the car was in perfect condition, but clearly something was wrong. I figured I'd take it to the mechanic tomorrow. I spent the night with Dana, going over our dreams for future. She fits so nicely in the crook of my arm. I dated a few girls here and there, but Dana was my first real relationship. Not only did she not care about my amputations, she celebrated me and my disability. We ran a marathon together last year. I never would have finished without her encouragement. I couldn't wait to marry her. In the morning, it was hard to get out of bed. Dana was still asleep, curled up beside me. I kissed her forehead. I had decided that I would take the car in early to be looked at, and then get a start on the job hunt. I put on my everyday prosthetics and headed out. I was halfway to the body shop when the rumble started again. I rolled my eyes. But before too long, I noticed something odd in the rearview mirror. Every time I glanced in that direction, something red flashed behind my seat. It was like a shadow. It disappeared right when I caught sight of it. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I couldn't help but think of Jane. There is something living in the back seat. At the mechanic, I watched as they did a thorough inspection of the car. They checked under the hood, in the seats, everywhere. They couldn't find anything that made a rumbling noise. In fact, they said the car was in better shape than it should be for its age. I pushed back a little, asking again if there was any way an animal could be living in the car somewhere. Their exact answer: "Unless it's invisible, there's nothing living in your car." I felt embarrassed. Of course, there was nothing in my car. I was being stupid. Jane was just a woman who was deeply affected by her accident. I headed back home. I hit the first red light, and something pulled my hair. I swung my head around, but there was nothing. My shoulders got tense. I looked in the rearview mirror. The red flash bled into my seat. I kept staring, trying to catch another glimpse. The car behind me honked. I looked forward and realized the light was green. Reluctantly, I went ahead. Not even a minute went by before I felt nails on my neck. I turned around, but again nothing was there. I tried to focus on driving. "You're freaking out," I whispered. The whispers replied, "Out, out, out." I looked in the rearview mirror and saw what looked like a sick red arm sticking out behind my seat. It recoiled in an instant. Suddenly there was a resounding crash. The airbag slapped me back to the seat, my neck pinned sideways. I screamed, but my lungs were compressed. I must have rear-ended the car in front of me. It was my fault. I hadn't been paying attention. My imagination had nearly gotten me killed. The airbag deflated quickly, and the police were on the scene. I had completely smashed the car in front of me. Luckily, there was no one in the back seat of their car. Strangely, my car had no damage. Not even a scratch. I realized slowly that I had only just gotten the car and hadn't bought insurance yet. Needless to say, I spent a lot of time apologizing and talking with the police. When the incident was finished, and we had all run out of things to say, it was time for me to drive home. I dreaded it. Clearly, Jane had gotten into my head. I was seeing things, hearing things. I felt like I was going crazy. Even while I was talking to the police, I felt insane. They asked what happened to cause the crash. I had to pause and decide whether or not to say. Something in my backseat was talking to me, and I saw a red arm, and I wasn't paying attention to the road. Instead, I just told them the last part. I wasn't paying attention to the road. Before getting into the car, I called Dana. I told her about the crash, but left out the thing in the backseat. She told me to come over. Her apartment was actually closer, so I agreed. Plus, some snuggle time could make this all go away. Hesitantly, I got into the car. I inspected the back seat as thoroughly as I could. There was nothing there. Nothing wrong with it. Slowly, I pulled into traffic. I drove as slow as possible. The people around me were not happy with my speed, and I got honked at quite a few times. But I didn't care. I was not going to endanger any more lives. I spent the entire time in the car in a tense, statue-like pose. All of my muscles were ready for anything. I realized my hands were shaking a little. Stop it, I told myself. You're making this all up. It was a miracle that I made it to Dana's without incident. I almost cried when I pulled in front of her apartment building. She was outside waiting for me, a concerned look on her beautiful face. I got out of the car and went to hug her. She backed away, worried. "What is it?" I asked. She was looking at the car. "Who is that?" She pointed. I followed her finger with my eyes. There, sitting in the back seat with its face pressed against the glass, was a figure. A red human-like figure. One large eye was open and nearly digging into the window. It raised an arm as if to wave before completely disappearing. I felt like fainting. But Dana, being the person she is, turned to me. Her chin was squared and she was angry. "We're going to that bastard who sold you this thing and getting your goddamn money back."